Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 226, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. February is almost over. Can you believe it? Just a handful of days left in the second month of the new year. Time is already going by fast, and hey, we do get one extra day. That's right, it's a leap year, so we do have one extra day of February, so a little bit longer left than we normally would. But yeah, I was a little surprised to see that that's the date already, and I shouldn't be surprised because it is my brother's birthday. So happy birthday to my brother Eric. Um, I hope you have if you're listening, and I don't expect him to, since he doesn't live in Charleston, and you can only take so much Charleston news when you don't live here, I'm sure. But I hope you have a great day and get to spend time with the kiddos and your wife and our mom and dad and whoever else, and have a great birthday. I can't believe how old you're getting, and I say that tongue in cheek, as my birthday is just 4 days from today, and I will be after this little brief window where he is just 3 years younger than me. That'll end in 4 days when he will once again be 4 years younger than me. It's nice to have that little closer time frame. I don't feel quite as old, but that won't last very long. Hoping to have some fun plans for my own birthday. Once those are finalized, I'll let you know. But the plan is to do something either here in town that'll be fun, or perhaps get out of town. But either way, I'll be sure to update you and hopefully have some fun things to talk about. But you're not here for my happy birthday wishes to my brother, or to hear about my birthday and what I want to do. You probably could care less, and I don't blame you. So let's get into the reason you're here. Of course, that is the news. The East Coast is sinking. Not to sound alarmist, but that was the title of the article in the New York Times from this past week. Stop me if you heard this before. Climate change. But wait, there's more to it than that. I know a lot of people see, that title and they assume, oh, it's another climate change article, and whatever you feel, and I'm sure most people listening to this podcast realize that climate change is real. Whatever you feel in that department, it's not just that. There's actually more to it. So the reason that, yes, of course, Charleston is on the East Coast is one reason that I wanted to talk about this article, but the city of Charleston was specifically mentioned. And so I encourage you to go to the link in the show notes and be able to see it. They actually have some graphics where you can kind of see what they're talking about in this article. And it's pretty interesting. I hadn't heard, obviously I've heard of things like sea rise, the sea levels are rising, but I hadn't heard this side of the story. So I think it's pretty interesting. So new satellite-based research reveals how land along the East Coast is actually slumping into the ocean, which of course is compounding the danger from the global sea level rise. So not only are the sea levels rising, but parts of the East Coast are actually sinking at the same time. It's not just one, it's the two factors combined, which of course is speeding up the process. And what is the major culprit from this? Well, the sinking part, the major culprit is overpumping of groundwater. So before we dive into the specifics, they mentioned Charleston, which is affected by groundwater pumping as well as some other factors we'll talk about here in a moment. But the city of Charleston is actually sinking up to 5.7 centimeters per decade. Now, of course, doesn't sound like a lot. We'll say 6. We'll round up. 6 centimeters every 10 years. You're not going to notice a big difference, obviously, as far as like one fell swoop, all of a sudden, your house is underwater or something, or, it just incrementally, little by little, keeps adding up. And of course, the problem will just exacerbate if we don't make any changes to all sorts of parts of our lifestyle, or look into ways to combat this. So this new research comes from Virginia Tech and the U.S. Geological Survey, where they used satellite data to show the mounting threats to coastal communities like ours. And this was an interesting stat. I didn't realize this. But nearly 40% of Americans live along coasts. Of course, that obviously is not just the East Coast, but still, for some reason, I don't know why, it makes sense. We have lots of coastline, but there's also that huge section in the middle of the country. I just figured there'd be a different percentage. But in any event, 40% of Americans live along the coast, so this will affect many of us. And depending on the cities and towns, of course, this isn't always the case, but a lot of places along this coast, these are old cities. We have aging buildings, roads and rails face structural damage from floods, which we know very much about here, and so that also isn't helping the problem. And now also the global average sea level has been rising around 3.3 millimeters per year since the early 1990s. This according to satellite readings from NASA. So this isn't just guesswork. This is a combination of science as well as like actually seeing the differences between years. So we have here in Charleston sinking 5.7 centimeters per decade, but at the same time, sea level is rising 3.3 millimeters per year. So just over what, 30 millimeters per year, obviously more than that, but I'm sorry, per decade, 30 millimeters per decade. So, when you combine that with the 5.7 that we are sinking per decade, you can see how, again, although it's incremental and it'll take a long period of time, it's not that long to see where problems could start in our lifetime, when some already have. To make matters worse, based on longer records from tide gauges, we have found out that rate is accelerating. So even those numbers I just mentioned, they are going to increase as we go forward. This is all according to Kenneth Miller, a professor of Earth and Planetary Sciences at Rutgers University, and was part of the study. So sinking land, obviously makes this threat of sea level rise even worse. And it's worse in some places more than others, of course. And a dominant cause for the sinking land is groundwater depletion. So, according to the article, there is a layer. They call it a layer cake of overlapping aquifers that extends from New Jersey to Florida all along the coast. These provide a reliable source of water for drinking, irrigation, industrial uses, etc. Though our region gets regular rainfall, deeper aquifers below clay or bedrock can take hundreds or thousands of years to recharge once water is pumped out. Now, once water is removed, soils can compress and collapse, causing the land surface to sink. And cities built on drained marshland or fill are especially vulnerable to compaction, aka us, as we are built on marshland. And obviously, we are already well aware of flooding problems and such, and it's just going to get worse. Now, can anything be done about this? Of course, the pumping groundwater, we could stop. I mean, we can't, but you know what I'm saying. Like, you can lessen that. We could try to rely on other outlets. Now, how realistic is that? It's hard to say, of course. Now, we're going to need more than just that, because obviously we can't stop, cutting off all our access to water. And there is an effort among multiple federal agencies to coordinate on all these climate risks. And it's grown in recent years as they've done studies and tried to figure out what can and can't be done. Now, this particular survey of the Atlantic coast was part of a broader USGS study on all coastal hazards. So the good news is that the government and others in the scientific community, for instance, are aware of the problem, and studies are being done to figure out, how exactly can we combat this particular issue. And also, we know about climate change, and we've been talking about that for decades. So between the two, there's been a lot of work to try to figure out the best way possible to move forward. Now, as we're all aware, there is some pushback to all things climate change. And although this particular story also involves, the pumping of groundwater, uh, it still is exacerbated by climate change. And we know how that goes. It's a political thing. It shouldn't be, but it is. There's people who don't believe that it's real, or more so nowadays, a lot of people don't think that humans are a cause of the problem, or that humans are making it worse. This is just natural. The earth goes through cycles, whatever it is that they make for an excuse. And so a lot of legislation doesn't get passed or gets overturned if a different administration comes in. So that's the bad news to the good news. Although we're looking at it, and there are maybe ways to slow this down, we know how hard it can be to get things passed. I'm hopeful that as far as this groundwater situation, because it's not exclusively a climate change thing, more people will buy into any proposals or legislation or whatever it may be to try to fix that issue. So we'll see. I know a lot of these things, like I said, when I'm talking about millimeters per decade, doesn't sound like a big deal. Of course, that's not the best thought process to have, like, oh, that's someone else's problem, not me, not my kids, probably, maybe my grandkids, like not a great outlook on it to pass the buck and like, well, it doesn't affect me. Uh, so that's, putting that aside though, this is something that could become a huge issue if nothing is done about it. So something to keep our eyes on. I encourage you to go to the link in the show notes to learn a little bit more about this, and just keep it in mind as as we move forward, and as legislation may be proposed, or if we need to push politicians to ensure that our city, specifically here, and many cities on the East Coast, are going to be safe in the future. There was a bit of a kerfuffle, I don't know what else to call it, and a very bizarre situation in Hollywood. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the Charleston area for whatever reason, we're not talking about California. We're talking about the city of Hollywood here in South Carolina. Um, it's a bizarre story, to say the least. So when it first came out, the story didn't have a whole lot of details, but the bottom line was there was what was called a black mannequin seen hanging from a tree at a Hollywood residence. Now, the Racial Justice Network was alerted to this by someone who lives in that community, and they confirmed that the mannequin is hanging from the front yard of a white family. Obviously, you can see how this looks. What was described as a black mannequin looking like it had been lynched. It was hanging from a tree, and in any community, that's not good, but especially in the deep South. Uh, so that's how it was presented at first. And the Racial Justice Network released a statement, and then they held a press conference on Tuesday saying that the black community has made numerous complaints about the mannequin and are very nervous of the family who has that black mannequin in their yard hanging like it's been lynched. That, again, according to the Racial Justice Network. Local news reached out to Charleston County Sheriff's Office, and they said that they had not received any calls about the mannequin. So according to the Racial Justice Network, numerous complaints were made, but who were they made to? So that's the first question. Did the Charleston County Sheriff's Office get that complaint and just were like, there's not much they can do because it's someone's private property? Well, they claim they didn't get a call. So who was contacted, if anybody? Then News 2 here locally, they dug in and went to the property and spoke with a woman who said the object was a Halloween decoration that she had purchased from Walmart and just had not taken down yet. Okay, it's late February. Halloween was October. Hey, we all know people leave like Christmas decorations up for a long time, but a single hanging black mannequin for months after Halloween, that's also a little weird too. Now, ultimately, after this whole dust up, the display was taken down. However, it was left near a tree that was surrounded by signs containing messages to the neighbors. So apparently, the woman or family that lived in that house had handwritten some notes that they now have placed as signs by the mannequin that was taken down. Uh, their statement basically says, in the 2 years this old tattered Halloween decoration has been up, none of my neighbors have complained, nor has Charleston County. If this was about my neighbors feeling threatened by my family, it would have been addressed sooner. This is targeted harassment that is playing on a very sensitive subject to gain the most attention. Another sign, the homeowner wrote and claimed that a local business owner sent a video of the mannequin to the Racial Justice Network after a civil dispute and noted that the decoration was mass produced from Walmart. And it's actually a white inflatable object that's wrapped in a black body bag made for Halloween, and that they had just been too lazy to take it down. So the story is just weird. So After it was taken down, you can clearly see that, yes, the quote unquote body is just some white inflatable object. So the mannequin, what was described as a black mannequin, it's actually a white man or inflatable, not even a mannequin. And it's in like what essentially looks like a trash bag. So uh, it it's also a bizarre Halloween decoration. Why is it in a trash bag? If you wanted to put someone hanging, why wouldn't you just? But even also, why would you want to put someone hanging? Just what it invokes, regardless of the color of the object, is not a very smart move. But regardless, very bizarre situation. The homeowner basically claiming this has been up for 2 years, which is wild after saying it's a Halloween decoration. And you're thinking, well, October to February, that's kind of a long time to still have it up there, but it could have been 2 years ago. It's even weirder that it hasn't come down yet or there hasn't been any complaints. So it makes you wonder, is there something to the accusation that there's some other dispute going on with neighbors? And so the neighbors tried to make this a big deal, realizing correctly that it could easily be exploited based on what it looked like. So just so weird. And I hope that the Halloween thing and this homeowner just being incredibly lazy. And look, I get it. I'm pretty lazy myself with little things, like taking down decoration. I'm too lazy to even put up decorations. Who am I kidding? So I'm hopeful that that's true. And that's all this was. Because obviously, the other possibility is much, much worse. And you know, uh, let's just hope that's what it was, and this is the end of it, and whatever's going on with those neighbors gets resolved. But a very weird story. I wasn't sure, after seeing it all play out, like, is this even worth bringing up? But I just think it's so weird and so many different accusations that I don't know, I felt like it needed to be talked about. So we'll see if there's any updates to this. Hopefully, this thing is done and the explanation was accurate and the neighbors believe it, and that is that. Meanwhile, not a great week for police in South Carolina, at least in terms of stories that came out. I'll try to run through these pretty quickly. Body camera recordings were presented by a sheriff's office here in South Carolina, and it shows that deputies fired dozens of shots with automatic weapons at an 81-year-old man who they said pointed a pistol at them after calling 911. A sheriff spokesman said in the video briefing that it is unclear at this time if Walter Lester McDonald III ever fired the pistol that was found near his body in the backyard of his home in Greenville. And this is a suburban home in Greenville, so not directly in the city. The presentation, which included edited recordings of the 911 call and video from several body cameras, was posted this week by the Greenville County Sheriff's Office on YouTube. So, an internal investigation, according to Sheriff Hobart Lewis, found that the deputies didn't violate Sheriff's Office policies and have returned to work. However, a state investigation continues, so prosecutors can determine whether they think this shooting was justified on criminal charges. This incident actually happened back on December 27th, but it's taken a while for this information to get out. So basically, what happened in this situation was the man, McDonald, who has passed, summoned the deputies to his home. He told the 911 dispatcher that his wife would like to speak with you guys. She would like to talk about an issue. So it's already weird that he calls, but then hands the phone to his wife. Why didn't she just call? But okay. She then says she felt uncomfortable after she had accused him of having an affair. She said she confronted him and he got kind of aggressive. And, so she was a little worried. And when dispatchers asked if he had any guns, she said, "We have a house full of weapons." Deputies show up to the home. They're talking to the wife, who then led them to the living room where McDonald was sitting on a couch. A deputy saw he was holding a gun and repeatedly ordered him to put it down, telling a colleague that McDonald was pointing it at the ceiling. At no point in the video selections that were presented by the sheriff's office did McDonald threaten himself or others. So no threats during these videos. The next clip, goes on to show that they're taking his wife away from the house and then taking up positions outside the home. 10 minutes later, the video shows McDonald opening the front door. A deputy again asked him to drop that. Well, I shouldn't say asked, demanded he drop the gun. But McDonald went back inside. Deputies who took up positions in the neighbor's yard then spotted McDonald in his backyard. So he had gone back in the house and then went out back. Now, these videos were narrated by a spokesman by the name of Ryan Flood, and he said at one point McDonald pointed his weapon at an officer, although, according to news reports, this detail seemed impossible to determine on the video. So they're saying he pointed the gun at an officer. You can't see it on the video, so I guess we're just taking the officer's word for it, which historically doesn't work out well. Obviously, the caveat is this officer or officers may not be lying. This could be completely true. So despite my remark, it absolutely could be. Problem is, we don't have any video proof of it, so we don't really know. He was ordered to put the gun down. Officer in the video said, "Put it down, bud." And then about 15 seconds later, the first shots can be heard. And several officers were recorded firing bursts of gunfire over the next 25 seconds, including one deputy who ran toward McDonald and fired repeatedly through the fence in his backyard at close range. Deputies called for medics as they handcuffed McDonald, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. So the sheriff's office is taking their officer's word for it. There's nothing on the video that shows he didn't point the gun. So they've decided the officers are fine and back to work, but the state is still investigating. It'll be interesting to see what, if anything, they decide to do. Like I said, man very well could have pointed the gun at officers, but we don't know that. You can't see it on the video. But just a horrible situation no matter what. An 81-year-old man is shot multiple times. And again, if he pointed a gun at an officer, unfortunately, the officers don't know if that gun's loaded. If you're going to fire at them, this can happen. But if he didn't point it at them, obviously this is a much bigger tragedy. And unfortunately, based on what's been released so far, we may never know the actual truth. The other story involving police officers is way more bizarre. It does not make any sense, but this apparently has happened. 3 South Carolina sheriff's deputies have been charged with misconduct after they allegedly reported 5 hoax emergencies about finding a dead body while on duty. Police officials announced this last Tuesday. So Chesterfield County Sheriff Cambo Streeter said he learned about possible misconduct by 3 of their deputies a couple weeks ago. So, based on the nature of the allegations, SLED was asked to investigate. They began their inquiry, and they said in a statement on Facebook that the Chesterfield County Sheriff's Office was cooperating fully. The 3 officers involved were charged last Monday with misconduct in office, criminal conspiracy, and aggravated breach of peace. Those are that is coming from SLED themselves about the charges. The arrest warrant that was released by SLED stated that the 3 officers, while they were on duty on February 4th, reported 5 hoax emergencies in the Cheraw, Chesterfield, McBee, and Pageland municipalities. The false calls were made to convenience stores or local municipal, it's a tough word to say, law enforcement agencies, and notified whoever picked up the phone about the location of a dead body within those areas. The hoax calls obviously triggered emergency responses from local law enforcement agencies. They had no idea this was a hoax, so resources were dedicated to getting to those areas. Now, the warrant says that the charges were based on interviews with the 3 officers and were corroborated by information obtained during the SLED investigation. So it doesn't say if they admitted to it or not, but obviously these were hoaxes as no bodies were found. So even if they denied it, they must not have provided a good reason while they were making these claims. And at this point, it's not clear what motivated the officers to make the fake calls. It really makes 0 sense. The 3, by the way, were booked at the Chesterfield County Detention Center last Monday. They were released on $30,000 bonds. So super, super bizarre situation. Why are they making hoax calls? Why are they making them while on duty? It would seem like it'd be pretty easy to figure these things out. What was the point of all this? So strange. And I'd be interested to see what comes out, depending on how things move forward. If there's a court case, if these things are, sometimes deals can be made or charges might not be brought. So we might not ever really find out what the hell the reason for all this was. But very bizarre story. Certainly one that I'm very interested to learn more about. And finally, some data that was released in January, and I just came across it and felt like we should report upon it. This comes from Live 5 News. They were talking about newly released data that shows Charleston, Berkeley, and Dorchester counties were near the top in the number of reported human trafficking cases here in South Carolina. This is coming from the 2023 Human Trafficking Task Force annual report. Again, this came out in January at the State House. It was talked about in a press conference by State Attorney General Alan Wilson. And in that report, it said that the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED, as I've mentioned in other stories, opened 357 cases that included nearly 500 potential victims just last year alone. Berkeley and Charleston counties had the fifth and sixth highest number of cases, while Dorchester County ranked ninth. The county with the most was Richland. They had 43 cases. For the counties a little bit closer to Charleston, Berkeley had 23 cases. Charleston was tied with Spartanburg and Lexington with 21 cases, while Dorchester had 18. So again, that's those numbers don't seem big, but when you're realizing that these are involving human trafficking, obviously any number is too big. But that many separate cases is pretty staggering, and especially when you realize that each case can have many, many victims. As I mentioned in the state, 500 potential victims. So what is the state doing to combat this? Well, the Tri-County Human Trafficking Task Force say that they are currently piloting a few programs. One includes a youth advocacy education program for students to be certified as youth advocates, basically training them how to potentially be able to tell if someone could be in trouble, if there's something to be worried about, and how to report it. The task force is also working on a public health approach for this year. They'll work with hospitals to identify vulnerabilities, risks of trafficking, and actual victimization. So education in the community definitely a good thing. Hopefully they can spot potential trafficking incidents and be able to get these things figured out quicker. The first human trafficking investigator dedicated specifically to the Tri-County area started last week. So this is a very new program. And in the future, they'll be hiring a victim services bilingual coordinator. They planned on doing that this month. Now, they also were awarded $7 million in funding to fight human trafficking. So again, very new program, just getting going, but they've got some funding. They're hiring people and they're getting education out into the community. So hopefully, when the new report for 2024 comes out, we will have a lot less cases, or maybe we'll see more because people are identifying them more. But ultimately, hopefully, over time, this will lower the amount of cases, and we can get people out of these horrific situations. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you so much for listening. I know this one was a little bit longer than normal, but lots to talk about, and I appreciate you all sticking around. Visit the link in the show notes for more information on all of these stories. And also, if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast, I greatly appreciate it. Big thanks to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. I also need to thank Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. And of course, a big thank you to you for listening. Have a great rest of your week. I will talk to you on Friday. Until then, good night and good luck.